I'd like to say a few things about the use of photography in what we do. And, well, it's proper and improper use, if you could even call it that. Um, when you are learning how to draw and paint, I think probably at the very beginning, working from either plaster cast or even photography is very, very important. It's a great way to learn because you're learning how to control your media and you're learning how to control edges and shapes and get them in the right place. And it's an inexpensive way of doing that as opposed to jumping right in with the model or working from the imagination right away when you really don't know what stuff really looks like. You haven't built up I had a teacher call it the well of unconscious cerebration. Still turning that over my head was what that exactly means. Um, so in the beginning, working, at first, simply copying the shapes that you see in photographs is a great way to learn. Um, Now, photography in the artwork that I do for myself, I've certainly have experimented with it, and I don't accept the macho artist creed that real artists don't use photography. About the only artist I've ever heard of that is totally inflexible, and that was probably Leyendecker. And it certainly has my respect for that. But I think that there is value in using every tool that is available to you to its fullest and evaluating what is output as opposed to how it was done. Once you're more advanced and in control of your media and can get it to do what you want it to do, probably working from life would be the best step forward that you can make, because you're not simply copying shapes. And if you look at easel painters, advanced oil painters, and looking at what they're painting, they're very artificial creations. They are not simply copying the shapes that's there. Uh, um, it's a set of symbols or a language that they've developed over a long period of time. And when you're working from life, those shapes are not totally obvious. You can see when someone is painted from a photograph very, very clearly, especially if they don't know what they're doing. They've copied the shortcomings of a photograph, the lack of exposure latitude. Um, it's very clear when that's been done. And I'm not saying that that's bad. I mean, if say for instance you look at Chuck Close's paintings, they are all about process and photography. Or another painter like Alex Kanevsky, he has a lot of aspects of photography and shutters and motion blur that he uses in the painting, and he is really exploring aspects of photography that how it relates to painting, and it's very interesting. So, neither of those guys said, "Oh, photographs bad," but they're using them in good and interesting ways. And let's talk about maybe some bad ways to use it. Probably and you might say, okay, well, he's probably going to talk about tracing now. Well, yeah, let's talk about tracing. Drew Struzan traces photographs. Norman Rockwell did. I have here an example of Mucha using a gridded photograph to draw from. But all three of those artists probably drew from life and are extremely fine draftsmen. And their process probably varied over the years, and they didn't always draw from photographs. So when it came time to turn out work on a deadline and under a schedule, if a photography was available, then they would use it. I remember a talk by Drew Struzan years ago where people were pressuring him for some tips and secrets. And he said, okay, here's a good tip. Hire a professional photographer to make good scrap to work from. Uh, and good professional photographers could run into thousands of dollars. So he might do a poster campaign for $50,000, and he'd spend 10 of that having a real good photographer shoot everything that was necessary, and then he would design it and collage it together. It's wonderful work. And I don't think that it is any. It's clearly done from photography, but it is so finely done and is so artfully done that it isn't a problem. Now, because people see that, and beginning artists especially, they do take the crutch of working from photographs and using them and abusing them, and it looks really, really bad. And as I said, I have explored using it. I don't really use it as much. I haven't found. I'll use it as a reference. Certainly, I don't know what a typewriter from 1933 looked like. So I'll go and find that. Sometimes I'll use photography as a general color field, because sometimes the color information in a photograph is very interesting to me and is very different than what you'd see in a painting. So I've explored all that. A lot of it I've discarded, but again, it goes back to what I was talking about is using it in the playtime. And trying to figure out how you can integrate that into your process. And there is definitely a pressure, I think, on concept artists. Kind of what I was talking about with Mala's sketch. Is people want things to look photographic. The aesthetic of a photograph seems to be very popular among marketing types and other people who buy commercial art, and that's kind of sad to me. Well, because if they see something that looks painted, it automatically isn't as good, because people equate photography or painting that looks like photography with skill, and that couldn't be further from the truth. And I guess that's where people who have such dead set against any use of photography get their fear of it, and they should be afraid of it if it, as I said, if it isn't well used. But in general, I would say use photography, use it well, and probably beyond a certain point of technical expertise, you probably shouldn't be using it much at all. One of my teachers, Harry Carmine, he would draw from the model as studies, but his paintings were entirely done from his mind. And I never quite understood that, but now I do completely. Years and years of drawing from the model, and then it becomes inside your head so that you can compose, and then what you draw and paint from there becomes completely and utterly your own. But we're asked to draw and paint as concept artists so many things that we've never seen in real life. So we have to use photography in order to figure out what stuff looks like, and what certain lighting situations look like. So it really does have its uses. And another aspect of photography is making a client happy and getting a job done on time, within budget, to a high degree of finish and detail, which is absolutely demanded. And if I can do that with photography, I absolutely will. I've experimented with painting from photographs by looking at it. I've traced over shapes of photograph. I've used photograph directly in the illustration. I have played with all this in my sandbox time, And when I find that it is uh, suitable for the job at hand, don't have the slightest problem of doing that. Do I think that this lessens me as an artist when somebody looks at me and goes, "Ooh, I see a photograph in there"? Well, you have to look at, I have been hired to solve a problem, to sell a product. I am not being paid to show off what a badass artist I am. And I think you probably do well to think of it that way as well. Um, just forget the macho painting stuff, and use whatever tools is going to make your clients' problems disappear, and have their and if photography is part of that, then absolutely use that. But for the sandbox time, and sure, play with it, use it in different ways. But when you're really trying to figure out how to learn how to draw and paint, I'd probably stay as far away from photography as I possibly can, and to know that how to get around the the dreaded stamp of photography and painting. Because the aesthetic, personally, I don't really like it, so I don't really do it. Work that I just would do for myself, and I'm sure I'll figure out different ways of using it in the future, and I'll experiment with that in my sandbox time. But mostly the experimentation that I do is not with photography, at least not anymore. Less and less, because I've found its limitations. Of course, you might come at it from a completely different angle and try to become an excellent photographer, and a lot of the creative aspects of your work would be done in there, and photo manipulate that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that way of working. Let's see where you go with it. Everybody should be working in their own way, and you have to kind of accept the possibility that as you go off and chase a butterfly into the weeds and go into some very strange way of working, like I'm going to work with encaustic paints on top of physical objects tied down to a board with baling wire. It's possible there may be nothing at the end of that road, but there might be. You might strike it rich. So depending on what kind of a gambler you are, you might want to do that or not. But painting from life as opposed to photography, I think, is very important if your ultimate goal is to paint from the imagination. And the reason is because in reality, your viewpoint is always moving, the model is always moving, the light is always subtly changing. It's easier to see something in the round and put it together in 1,000 different ways in your head as to what is important and what is not. And a photograph eliminates all that. So when you're working from life, you have to abstract things quite a bit more and see their basic shapes and what basic forms cause the shapes of light and dark, and cast and form shadows and different textures, and analyze it and put it back together by running it through your mind and then back out onto paper. With photography, it's far too easy to simply transcribe the light and dark patterns that you see in the photograph. And that's not going to teach you as much about form, because when you're having to draw and paint from life, you have to internalize those forms so that they get deeper into your head. And when you're working from the imagination later, you'll be using and making shapes and drawing in a way that is, well, not only very characteristically yours, but it'll probably read a lot better because you won't be drawing a lot of things that are very flat and accidental nonsense that you see in a photograph. And in a photograph, say for instance, if you have a model and the model is speaking and you look at the neck, you'll see the sternomastoid and the very complex anatomy of the throat moving, and you'll see what's important in that. In a photograph, all you'd see is, you wouldn't see any of that. You would see just you might see a few highlights of different things that might be inconsequential, but would you really see the key points of anatomy that show the direction of the neck and the shoulders? No, you wouldn't. But if you're working from life, you would, because the model is hopefully moving a little bit. And in working from life, one exercise that I think is excellent is having the light constantly moving, and that is having somebody walk around the room with the light, so that the light is always changing. Now, if you do that to a lot of illustrators drawing from life, they throw up their hands and run from the room, because that's how illustrators mostly work, is by fine gradations in halftones and shapes of light and dark. But a fine artist generally works more, has a wider range of tools at their disposal for showing forms, primarily, which is synthetic modeling, which is the planes facing you are light and receding planes are darker. So if you are drawing from a model where the light is constantly changing, you'll see the forms, I think, a lot more clearly, and you'll have to invent ways of showing that form as opposed to just copying the light and darks that you see. And that really, I think, will help you internalize the forms and remember them well. And another thing about working from life is, if you've drawn 1,000 different knees from 1,000 different models, you will see, up around, maybe 600 or 700 knees, you'll see what aspects of what you're seeing say knee. You'll start seeing the anatomy much more clearly. A lot of people's knees, they have fat on them, or different things obscuring the basic forms underneath. But if you draw enough of them, then you'll start to see what is really going on there, because you say, okay, I've seen that before, and I've seen this landmark before, and this shape and this form is very characteristic of just about every knee I've ever drawn. So when you go back to your studio and are drawing from your imagination, you're going to draw something that is very, very knee-like, as opposed to, I don't draw from life, I just take some photographs and I'm drawing the shape that I see. You understand how incredibly limiting that is? When you're drawing and painting from a photograph with no experience from life, you're utterly crippled. So, okay, now at the end of this lecture, I'm coming out strongly against photography, but please understand, everything I said earlier, I completely believe in, that photography has its use, and it's up to you to be very careful of its use and abuse, and realize what a powerful tool it can be, but also how horribly it can be maligned and misused.